Jim McGuinness taking over Donegal once more. What were your thoughts when you saw that? I'll tell you what I thought. I thought, okay, came in and revolutionised Gaelic football in the sense of how they played, and it wasn't brilliant to watch initially, and that 8 points to 6 All-Ireland semi-final will never be forgotten in 2011. But there were times when it was thrilling, and there was some of the games in the atmosphere of that All-Ireland final in 2012, Donegal Mayo, was something I'll never forget. No more than actually the Kildare quarterfinal the year before, when there wasn't that big of a crowd, but when it got to extra time, it was just rocking in there. But if he's going to revolutionise football again, after 10 years of being away from it, and you couldn't say, like, obviously he went out to football, really brave thing to do, went to China, went to America with Charlotte Independence. That only lasted 14 games. Had a spell with Celtic before that as well. You couldn't say it was a ringing success just yet. Maybe he'll go back. But to then think he'll come back to soccer or Gaelic football now again, it's a big ask to think that he can revolutionise the game again. Maybe that won't be his plan, but, it's a big ask.
It's a fascinating second coming, and it's, his name was always going to be mentioned around Donegal vacancies because people just long for, it's like Brian McAniff's name was always going to be mentioned after 92. Your name is always going to prop up, but did I ever actually think he was going to come back as manager? No, not realistically. Even though I was chatting to a few good sources last week and kind of tipped me off that he was the man. So I kind of just put it out there last week, and then all of a sudden, a couple of days later, and it snowballs, and all of a sudden he's manager, and he's this kind of stellar backroom team there. A couple of things. The last time he was senior manager, he had been with the 20s, and he'd taken a really good group. Remember Murphy hit the crossbar in the All-Ireland final against Dublin. I think Johnny Cooper was captain for Dublin, but he had Michael Murphy, probably the greatest Donegal player of all time, and this player who was going to be, senior for the next 10 years and was an unbelievable leader. I don't think those type of players are there now. And maybe McGuinness's intimate knowledge of the underage scene is probably not there, even though I'm sure his finger is still on the pulse there as well. For a couple of things, he's probably going to get the likes of Ryan McHugh, Michael Langan, all the O'Donnells, all these lads are probably going to come back into the fold. Wouldn't you come back into the fold? You would be, your chest would be up and you'd be thinking, geez, this is something to buy into here. Whereas maybe, last year, maybe that wasn't the case. But you wonder whether the personnel is there. Then you wonder, as you said, time has moved on. It's 9 years since they were beaten in the 14 All-Ireland final. I know he's had he's dipped in and out with Naomh Martin and Louth a bit, and he took a session with Galway, and he was with the Waterford Hurlers a small bit as well. So he's been in around county scenes, but big difference between that and actually being manager. So it's going to be fascinating. We don't know, and I think that's the fascinating thing about it. They were at a pretty low ebb when he took over in 10, and they're at a low enough ebb now as well. Expectations probably aren't, in a way they aren't that high, but in a way they are quite high as well, because you're just expecting them to conjure something, get them to an unbelievable base of fitness, and come with some sort of system of play that we haven't seen before. And if he comes with something that we haven't seen before, brilliant. Intercounty football is craving for something like that now.
Yeah, and his years being involved in soccer means that there is always the chance that there's going to be a huge influence from soccer in what he's doing, because I think there's always crossovers from other sports into Gaelic football and, hurling to some degree as well. We've seen it with basketball, we've seen it with other sports. And I'd say soccer, definitely how players move. Sorry, the movement, the interchangeable movement of players and all that kind of stuff. You can see how there might be some sort of an influence there. But you have to ask, and I mean this respectfully, going back to Gaelic football at this point and knowing that, nothing of note has really happened since Charlotte Independence and since leaving that role a few years ago. Is that kind of suggest that the door is closed to some degree on soccer, or that it's kind of, this is it, maybe it didn't fully work back to Gaelic football?
That's what it would suggest. I'm kind of hearing that he could have had the Finn Harps job last year if he wanted it. And I don't know if he was holding out for something maybe a bit bigger or whatever. That didn't materialise. And now he's back with Donegal. I think is it a three-year term with a view to a fourth or something like that. So he's gone. It's not like a stopgap or anything like that. He's gone in and he's going to give it all of his attention now. The soccer thing is interesting. It mightn't have been, a success rate like that, but I'm sure it's probably opened his eyes to different things and how to do things differently. He's Colin McFadden in the backroom team, who's obviously involved with Sligo. I think he was involved with Sligo in 2023. He'll, I'm sure, who's his brother-in-law, obviously. He'll, I'm sure, bring plenty to the table. Is it Eamon McGee that's involved with him as well? I think it's Eamon McGee. It's just going to be fascinating to see what the second coming is like. What style do they play? Most teams have figured out the McGuinness style now, or most intercounty teams are able to get around that. So what's his second coming in terms of game plans? And does he have the players? He had the players probably in 11 and 12, 13 and 14. Does he have the players to really go gung-ho now? That's probably a bit of a doubt as well, I'd have to say.
Yeah, and he was also able to capture their hearts and minds then. Can you capture the hearts and minds of a new generation with the way you talk? Like, he's a very good speaker. I mean, I've seen him at so many press conferences and what have you, and leave out the 2012 All-Ireland final one where he had a journalist ejected from the room. Other than that, I thought he was very engaging to listen to and, really good. So let's see if he's able to capture the heart and minds of another generation, a newer generation.
Yeah, he is very engaging. He does draw you in, and a lot of those guys that he's going to be trying to draw in now are lads that were probably totally captivated by him 10 years ago when they were only teenagers. So yeah. I'd imagine they'd be hanging on his every word.